We are back with Kate O'Grady, and we're going to dive in and talk a little bit about, I guess, what happens on the way out of a relationship. So, Kate, when people are separating, I'm going to ask you the question, how do people separate well?
Okay, so you can do it, I guess, is the thing. I think most people associate separation with fighting and conflict and drama and
Court,
lawyers. And just because you have lawyers involved doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to end up in court or end up in a fight. Sometimes having really good lawyers involved early on can stop that from happening. So it can be helpful to get good lawyers involved on both sides early on, just so people are getting reasonable advice and they're not being told they're entitled to something that they're not, because that can cause a lot of problems. So I think key tips for separating well is to be honest with yourself about what you've done in the relationship. For example, if you came in with $100,000, don't insist it was $400,000, if you can't prove it. And don't say that the other person did nothing if they did things. I think it just makes it so much harder. And I think understand that it is a process that people find difficult. People are hurt, they're angry, people come at it at different stages. But the quicker you can get out of it and move past it, the better it will be, especially if you've got kids. So the key thing, I think, is to try to work out an exit strategy as soon as possible. And the best way to do that is to be upfront about your financial circumstances and don't try to hide things, because we find them. And it just risks that if you do enter into an agreement and you haven't disclosed something of significance, it will be set aside. So it won't actually protect you. So if you're not honest, you're only risking your financial security in the future by potentially having something set aside. So be upfront about your financial circumstances, give disclosure to the other person. Both parties have to disclose.
So disclosure's when you have to talk about everything that you have.
So disclosure is basically a fancy way of talking about information and documents that are relevant to an issue in the matter. So it applies to parenting, which could be, psychological reports or school reports or medical reports for a parent or a child. In a property or financial matter, in that context, it's generally you're looking at documents that prove your income, so tax returns, pay slips, employment contracts. Then you're looking at bank statements to show, your money that you've got in the bank, but also potentially money that you may have had and no longer have in the bank. Value of shares, value of property, value of cars.
Yeah.
If you have an interest in a trust, value of super, what debts you have. Ideally, we want to come up with a balance sheet that has a list of what the assets and liabilities and the superannuation is and agree on the values. If people can't agree on the values, we'll generally get a valuer in to get a valuation done, and then try to exchange, some offers back and forth. If you can't agree, go to mediation. Most matters would settle somewhere in that process. It's still, I think, about 3 to 5% of matters that actually end up going to court.
That's a very small percentage.
Yes, yeah. And I think, you tend to sometimes get a bit of a skewed view if you're dealing with litigation matters, because you tend to feel like that's how everybody separates, but that's not the reality. Most people settle very early with the assistance of a whole range of people.
Yeah. And do you think people would separate better if they had the conversation at the start?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think not just at the start, but ongoing. If you have clear communication and get help with it. Not everyone finds that easy. It's really hard and it's something you have to work on. But if you do it, it's like going to the gym. If you're looking after your physical health, but if you look after your relationship health and have those conversations throughout, you don't see the same issues. And it's funny, most people that actually go through the BFA or the financial agreement process never need them. And it's really interesting if you think about the psychology, because they've had all of the discussions. They've talked about all of the what-ifs that could happen in the relationship, and they've both talked about it, and they've both had advice about it, and they've both had it documented. This is what we agree. This is what's going to happen during, and this is what will happen when we separate. most of those people never need it.
Yeah, okay, that's really important. So the binding financial agreement, let's go back to it. Who do you think should get a binding financial agreement?
Yes.
Who do they work for?
Yeah. So my favourite ones to do are people that are potentially in their second relationship, maybe been through it before, a little bit older, know that they're not going to have children, and are prepared to have those conversations and share the information. They're fine. They're still complex, and you still have to have regard to all of the contingencies and changes in circumstances that could happen. But they're a lot easier than younger couples that haven't thought about any of those things and where there's a risk that there might be children or significant changes to their circumstances. So definitely second or third relationships, especially where people have already been through the process and they know how awful it can be when it's not done well, they tend to be much more open to doing it properly and participating in the discussion and going through the disclosure because they don't want to have that same experience that they potentially had the last time around.
Yeah.
So it can be quite a different experience to do that for. And I've had a lot of repeat clients where I've acted for them in their separation that they then come back and say, can you please do a financial agreement for me so I don't ever have to go through that again? And so they're where it can be a really, really useful tool for those people.
Yeah, and I think hearing you say that, where people have learnt that lesson and they're coming back to make sure they've got that binding financial agreement in their second relationship, my wish for people is that they can learn from somebody else's mistakes first or what they didn't have in place first and actually get that in place for them on their first relationship and not have to learn it the hard way.
Yeah. And look, I've been through my own separation and I think, there's a lot of things I learnt the hard way through that. Thinking, it'll be all right. We don't need to do that. And on reflection, there were lots of things that I could have done better or differently through that process. I think it's made me a better lawyer.
I bet it has.
I have a lot more empathy for people going through the process, and I understand what it feels like to go through that and what it feels like to receive a letter from a lawyer and to sit in a courtroom and not be the lawyer in the courtroom. I know what that feels like. So I think that's given me a much better understanding of what it's like to be on the other side of it, and how to better understand people in that context and the stress that they're under when trying to make decisions.
And you saying that is so refreshing, that even working in this industry, even knowing everything you do about family law, when you were in the situation, you still had your emotions going, it will be fine. And I was the same, but I need someone like you to say to me, that's great that you're completely in love and you don't have to worry about this, but let me tell you the things that you need to put in place now to protect yourself.
Yeah, and that's her nice way of saying that the conversation is, yes, but have you thought about every possible bad thing that can happen? And it's an awful conversation to have with people when they're madly in love and they're in a new relationship and they're really excited because the whole road's ahead of them. And I just want, my favourite thing is if people stay together. I'm a champion for the lovers, and for the peacemakers. Notwithstanding my job is, related to separation, but I like to try to help people sort their matters out and not go to court. I hate court. But part of that job, my job, is I have to have really uncomfortable conversations. And I imagine it would be like a wills and estate lawyer saying, what if you die? It's it's not a nice conversation to have, but it's like, well, what if somebody gets sick, or what if they lose their job, or what if one person gets an inheritance, or what if this person promises to pay half of the mortgage and they don't, or what if you find out that they've got a gambling problem, or your online shopping problem, which would be that would be the things in my bank statement that I'd be, I don't know, uncomfortable about. But it's just thinking about all of the things that could potentially, what if someone has an accident and becomes disabled? Does the agreement still stand about, how things will be divided if someone gets sick or can't work? And COVID was wild for us.
It was so wild.
You know what it was like. Try tell people what's going to happen, even with property prices or what's going to happen with the share market, or we had no idea.
And everyone's separated?
Everyone. I've never been busy. I've never been busier because you have this melting pot of people that are stuck together, and you throw, relationship pressure, financial pressure, a lot of people losing their businesses and jobs, people being unwell, kids being home. That's a huge stressor, we see a spike in calls after each school holiday period when people have spent too much time at home, with kids, because it's hard, it's stressful. But then through COVID, if you throw in mental health issues, family violence issues, huge risk issues where people are stuck together.
Yeah.
It was incredibly busy, but really hard because we had a lot of uncertainty, particularly around property prices. I mean, I had a matter where there was a $2.5 million difference between a valuation that the clients paid for and then what the house sold for.
You see that a lot.
And if you've got a property settlement where you're factoring a lump sum payment rather than a percentage and you have that level of difference, it's just wild. So I now build into my financial agreements, health pandemics like COVID-19 or things like that, to say that even in the event that happens, this will not be, not be set aside. Not that would necessarily bind, a court might find that that's not, appropriate. But they're the types of things that we have to think about is what are all the things that could happen in the future and how could that impact this couple.
So I think some of the things that people find scary about talking to a family lawyer, it would be a cost thing. And I know that at the start of a relationship, if we're going to encourage people to have those discussions and maybe get a binding financial agreement if it's appropriate for them, I'm not going to nail you down to a price. Can we get like a rough idea of, I guess, the cost that would be involved to prepare binding financial agreements, just really ballpark?
Yeah. So it really depends whether they're at the start of a relationship or whether they're at the end.
Let's just talk just at the start. A young couple, they've got an unequal amount of property. They just want to protect one person in that, that period, while they're getting on, just a real ballpark figure.
Yeah. So look, I've seen a lot of people quote prices like $1,500 or $2,500, and I realistically don't think that they can or should be done for that because of what's involved in it. So generally you would be looking at least $5,000 for a pre-separation financial agreement, but often between 5 to 10.
Yeah.
People really freak out at that. But what I would say is, well, if you don't have that and you can't agree on what your settlement could look like, you might be looking at $100,000 to $200,000 each in legal fees to go to court to have a judge make a decision. And so when you think about it in that context, it's really not that much of an investment if you have that peace of mind that you won't have to pay those, legal fees at the end.
And that's why I wanted to talk about the cost. I guess as someone who's paid both costs either side, I think paying that money up front at the start of a relationship and just having it all outlined and documented, and the percentage of people that I see on the other side that are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to court, and even before court they can get to that kind of level. But that could be saved at the start if they did this sort of planning. So I just wanted people, I guess, to not have the fear of a number, and I guess feel free to think about the cost. And when you're thinking about under $10,000, when we talk about, income protection, and we talk about buyer's agents fees, and we talk about stamp duty and the other costs that people have actually already put in place to protect their wealth, I think this is probably the bigger one and one of the most important.
Yeah, and it is. I was just about to say it's very similar to an insurance policy. And so if you think about having your house insured and having that insurance policy in place, having to pay a small amount of excess versus having your house damaged in a storm and then having to pay for the repairs without having an insurance policy in place. It's very similar.
Yeah.
So provided that and I think it really does depend on whether they're done properly, because a lot of people do them that shouldn't do them. And there's a lot of services that promote themselves as being, we'll do it, it's very simple. Just come and we'll do it for both of you and we'll send you both to a lawyer.
For both of you?
Well, and that's problematic in and of itself. they have to get separate legal advice, both parties. But there's a lot of services now that try to say, come to us and we'll do the bulk of it and then send you both to separate lawyers. And a lot of work for family lawyers is challenging those types of agreements to set them aside, because if they're not done properly, then they will be subject to challenge, and then you could still have to pay the legal fees down the track. So if you are going to do it, it is important that you do it properly and you see a lawyer that knows what they're doing. And unfortunately, that does mean a higher cost, but it also means greater protection, I think.
Yeah, well, there's no point in paying for something that isn't going to protect you. It's like an insurance policy. You want to make sure it's actually going to do its job.
Yeah, you pay for one of those insurance policies that has every exclusion under the sun, so there's no point paying the money in the first place.
That's right.
It's the same.